Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Oliver Burkeman. Oliver is a journalist and the author of The Antidote, Happiness for People Who Can't Stand Positive Thinking. He writes about productivity, mortality, and the power of limits. And today, we will speak about his latest book, 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for the Mortals. Oliver, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
So, the obvious question is, how do you manage to do it all? I mean, you are constantly writing books. You are a journalist, and yeah, how can you give us an idea of how do you put your life together?
I can, but first of all, but then I'm going to explain that I don't come anywhere close to doing it all, and nobody ever does. And it's this is a big part of what I want to try to say in the new book. But yeah, okay, about me. I live in Brooklyn, in New York, despite being British. There are plenty of us here. For many, many years, I worked at the Guardian newspaper, both in London and then here in the US, including writing this weekly column called This Column Will Change Your Life, which was a weekly column about happiness and psychology and productivity and all those kind of themes. I finished that up last year. And I write books rather slowly, and my editors get impatient with me about not having sent them in. So I don't feel, from my perspective, like I'm a sort of record-breakingly productive person. But you know, I love writing about this stuff, and I love talking to people about this stuff. So it's not, it doesn't feel like a chore in that sense.
Okay, so let me ask you, at one moment in your life, you decided to start writing books, okay, so you became a journalist, and then this is your third book, I see. So when did you say, okay, I'm ready to jump in and I'm ready to start being an author?
Well, when I first started thinking about being a journalist, I think I must have been about 6. I grew up in a house where the Guardian newspaper was on the breakfast table every day. And I definitely remember putting together little photocopied newsletters for my school mates when I was, probably about 8. I have no memory of them ever reading them, but I certainly pushed them. I certainly foisted them onto them. I don't know that anybody ever read it. So I was sort of into journalism and wanting to be a journalist from almost as far back as I can remember. I don't exactly know why, I guess. After I'd been doing this column for a while, I turned it into a collection of columns, which was my first book that you talk about. In a way, that's kind of cheating as a book, right? Because you're just making a selection of columns and editing them and putting them together. So my second book, my first sort of real book, I suppose you could say, why did I take that plunge? I guess after I'd been writing a while, an agent reached out to me and we were able to have lots of interesting conversations about a book idea. It took me a long time to sort of get into that right headspace, but it is a bigger challenge than an article, right? It is, it feels more momentous. There is a certain cultural cachet attached to books. So, and you really have to, in the column, I was often testing out ideas in a way. And in the book, you have to be a bit more sure that your ideas are valid. So I guess, yeah, that was just that was an interesting challenge. Once you get to a certain point in whatever you're doing, I guess you sort of want to try the next bigger
and
thing.
Then why is it productivity the subject matter that interests you the most to write about?
I mean, on some level, it's got to be because I have some issues here, right? I feel like nobody writes about anything that they don't struggle with. I think if I was like if time and organization and productivity was totally easy for me, it would not be interesting for a book. And I think, you know, in the first part of my adulthood, certainly, I think I don't know if you can hear this dog that I'm looking after at the moment, getting rather noisy in the background. In the first part of my adulthood, I think I was using these time management techniques and these productivity techniques to try to attain a certain kind of feeling of control over life that was, that I felt like I needed, right? You sort of like, life is scary when you become a grown up and you have all these kind of responsibilities and you have to decide whether to, sorry, I'm being distracted by this dog. Life is scary, and you have to sort of, you want to feel like you're more in control of things. So one of the ways that people try to manifest that, I guess, that sense of control, is by sort of feeling that they're organizing their time, that they know what they're going to do with their day. They're going to pack twice as much in as other people. They're going to be like in the driver's seat of life. And really, this book is what came sort of after the failure of that approach. I think this book is more about what I think I've learned in terms of how we can relate more productively or fruitfully to time, having tried to get this feeling of total control and just failed, over and over and over again. So maybe if I had less difficulty with it, I would not be able to write a book about it.
Okay, so you wanted to have control over your time. You realize that you fail, and in the realization that you fail, do you think now you feel more at least with your incapacity to control time, and maybe because of that you're controlling time better?
It's funny, is that a kind of a backdoor to the same result? I think the thing that I understand now, in a much deeper way than before, is that time itself is something you have to surrender to. The fact that you have a limited amount of it, the fact that you can't know what's coming next, the fact that you just get given one moment at a time. It's not like money or possessions, right? This is stuff you just have to accept. But it's not the kind of acceptance where you, in my opinion, it's not the kind of acceptance where you then just have to despair of ever doing anything, right? This kind of acceptance is the prelude to spending your time doing meaningful things. So the obvious, make this a bit more specific. I think a lot of us in busy jobs and in busy lives at this time in history feel that we have to do more things than we have the capability to do. And so we need more systems to cram more in, and we want to try to get on top of it all. And I think that desire to get on top of things is an example of what I'm talking about, right? It's an illusion, because we live in this infinite world, infinite potential emails you could receive or demands that your work could make on you. So you're never going to get on top of it all, because that's, it's infinity. So you can't get on top of it. But you keep chasing that goal and that feeling in the hope that maybe tomorrow or the next day you'll kind of have your life in working order, and that's an example of a struggle that, if you can drop that struggle a bit and accept that there will always be too much to do, that's when you can turn your attention and your energy to doing some important and meaningful things with your life. So it's not sort of nihilism, it's not about giving up. It's sort of giving up in order to engage more fully with work.
I have an example that of my life that maybe apply. At one time, I used to be a day trader. I used to buy and sell stocks every day. I used to wake up early to see what Europe was doing and Asia was doing, and I wanted to get every single penny of gain that it was possible to gain. Mm-hmm. And one time I realized that I was useless because I wasn't doing any better than the aggregate market. Right. So I abandoned my illusion that I could do better, that I could squeeze a few extra pennies out of the stock market, and I just gave up. And when I gave up and I started doing better, the market was doing the work for me. And I felt like I had more time and control of my investments, my life, everything else. It's when I abandon myself to the randomness of life that I feel like I got a little bit more control of my life.
That makes total sense, and it's a great parallel, I think, because I know you know more about how markets behave than I do, I'm certain. But like, you know, even if it were possible to gain that tiny edge, you have to balance that against what you could be doing with that time. And you know, unless you're doing it at the volume of the largest hedge funds or something, it may well be that what you would gain from that is just, you know, it's, you can't fit everything in. So it might well be that when you see how much of your effort and energy that's taking, it really makes its case for focusing on something else instead. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you feel that we focus sometimes or most of the time in the little details that doesn't really make a difference, and then we miss the big stuff, things that if we look our problems of life, our existence from a different point of view, we could become more efficient and more relaxed at the same time?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we do have a tendency to sort of over focus on very small, you know, put a huge amount of effort into sort of winning an edge for reasons that are not actually close to our hearts. It also makes me think of a whole argument that I have in the book about the way that we really want that feeling that the decks are cleared. You know, you really want that feeling that all those little emails are out of the way, and now you can focus on the thing, that the project that you really care about. And I try to argue, it's a struggle I still fight myself, but I try to argue that what we ought to be doing is cultivating some tolerance for that discomfort of knowing that the decks are not clear, and just diving straight into the important stuff first at the beginning of the day or the beginning of whatever time period you're talking about. Because if you're in the world that we live, if you're always trying to, first of all, get everything out of the way, you'll never win that battle. That will go on to the very end of your working life.
A few years ago, no, actually 2 decades ago, I used to be a financial advisor,
Right.
and I used to help people how to maximize their earnings and things so that they could get that goal of retiring one day.
Yeah.
And I saw my clients going deeper and deeper into debt because they wanted to buy the new iPhone and they wanted to buy the new vacation and they wanted to optimize everything. So all these things could be possible. And I feel like they missed the boat and they didn't look at the big picture, and they could be retired now, but they are still working, optimizing their emails and I don't know, every efficiency that they could get out of their life.
Yeah, no, yeah, you know, it's a familiar story, I think, and also part of that you're talking about there is it turns everything into a focus on the future, right? So you do need to focus on the future. I'm not someone who says like just don't pay any attention to what's going to happen, but if everything you're doing is for some other time, then you will just constantly be on a treadmill. You'll never locate the value of life in the only time that it ever is, which is now. So at some point, you have to give up the quest for optimization and efficiency. You have to limit it somehow. Otherwise, like it removes all the meaning from life.
One of your chapters is called "The Loneliness of the Digital Nomad." Can you tell us what is there? Because I find that myself and many of my listeners are digital nomad.
Are you a digital nomad? Would you describe yourself that way at the moment? Is that yes, right? Or
yes,
right? Okay,
yes.
Yeah. Well, you can tell me how true this is. You might have some problems with my argument, but what I'm really getting at in that chapter is not really, you know, beating up on digital nomads specifically, but this idea that there is a philosophy, an ethos in society, I think, at the moment, that what we should all be aspiring to is individual control over our time. And, you know, I, as much as anybody, I gave up my staff job at a newspaper so I could be in charge of how I ran my work and la, la, la. So I've done this too. But there's quite a lot of evidence that we are happiest as humans and as communities when our time is synchronized with other people's. And one of the things you hear digital nomads say, Mark Manson wrote a very good piece about this, about when he was a digital nomad, the author, is that it's difficult to have a social life in this context, because in a way you almost have too much control over your time. And I feel this too, right? I'm a freelancer. Quite a few of my friends are freelancers. Nobody could say we don't have autonomy over our time. And yet, how difficult is it to find a day when 3 people can meet up for a beer? All our schedules are completely desynchronized from each other. And, you know, I don't necessarily want to say we should all go back to the olden days of sort of much more traditional societies, but one benefit of those times of people working the same hours, all probably taking Sunday or Saturday, depending on where it was, you know, off. People were available to each other at the right times, right? You know, there was a synchrony, and I think that is a problem that we have as a society. It isn't just digital nomads.
Right. It's, the synchrony comes along because sometimes they are working together and they can just, instead of making an appointment, they can just ask each other's questions right there and then. So yes, I do feel lonely. I do feel lonely.
I think we all do to some extent in this world that we have created. So it's nothing to be ashamed of, but I do think that it's a good argument for thinking, like, how can you bring into your life 1 or 2 things that are not about controlling your time, but are more about being on some communal schedule. So, you know, if you're based in one place for a few months, you can join a society, you can join a club. I greatly miss, at the moment, it's about to start again, but I was in an amateur choir for a very long time before COVID made this the worst thing you could do, singing in a choir in COVID. So it had to stop for a while. But, you know, and it's kind of central to that, like, oh, I don't get to choose when I do it. I can't be like, oh, it's Thursday, I think I'll go to choir practice. No, it's Wednesday. Right. It's every Wednesday. Right. And if you don't show up, if you miss too many rehearsals, they kick you out. So, you know, it's like, it's you're surrendering some control there.
Well, I have something worse for you. I used to be a dance teacher. And dance teacher, especially tango dancing, requires being nose to nose with a perfect stranger.
Right, even worse for COVID, right? Yes.
Okay, one more question about your book. How do we become better procrastinators?
This idea of becoming a better procrastinator is just a sort of a humorous way of talking about the fact that, you know, there's a sense in which we are all always procrastinating on a lot of things, because we are finite and living in this infinite world. It's just a given that that most things you're neglecting at any moment. And so if you sort of tell yourself, well, my important goal is to not be neglecting anything, you will drive yourself a little bit crazy, and you will spread your energy too thinly among different things. Whereas if you sort of accept that procrastination of some kind is just built in to the situation of being a human, then you can make better and more conscious decisions about what to procrastinate on. And that's being a better procrastinator, right? That's saying, okay, these things, they matter, but they're not going to be the thing I focus on now, because this thing is going to be the thing that I focus on now. And it's painful, right? Because it does not, you can't get away with just neglecting unimportant things. You have to neglect important things as well, because various different reasons, you know, more is going to feel like it matters than you have time to do. So it's this kind of rather painful situation where you have to say, I would love to, you know, write a novel, do this, renovate my home. I'm just thinking of random examples, but like for now, only this one, you know, it's hard. Right. Because we feel, we itch to sort of say we're doing it all and working on it all. Yeah.
For the benefit of the listeners, could you tell us where do you get the title 4,000 weeks?
Oh, yes, should have said 4,000 weeks is roughly the average human lifespan in the West expressed in weeks. It's around about 80 years. Actually, if you live to 80, you get a few more than 4,000. But even the sort of record breakers, the people who have lived the longest anyone has ever lived, only get about 6,000 or 7,000 weeks. So it's just a way of really expressing this in a very strikingly rather harsh way to cause people to sit up and pay attention.
So being that we have such a limited amount of weeks, then I guess the best thing is to also consider this one as our last week of life.
That's a popular way of phrasing it, isn't it? To think about the day or the week as if it was your last. I think people get tangled up with that question because then they think, well, no, because if it was the last day of my week of my life, I would do these, like, right. I don't know, I'd either go see everyone I love or I don't know, go and commit crimes or something. I don't know. It depends on, depending on who you are. I do think that there is wisdom in that idea, though. And it sort of is in this notion that we don't, it's not that this week is likely to be my last or your last. It's that every single moment could in principle be the last because we have no form of control over guaranteeing the future. And I don't think that means you have to do particularly remarkable things with today or this week. But I think it does lend a certain extra vividness to being here. It's just more that it's kind of amazing that we got to be here at all, right? It's like an infinite number of people or potential people never got to be born at all. So it's kind of amazing that we have any weeks.
Well, Oliver, I think after checking out your book, I feel less guilty about the way that I use my time. I wonder if you could tell us one more time the title of the book and where can the listeners follow you or find out more of what you're doing?
Sure. It's called 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals, and you can get it in all the usual places you get books. And my website is Oliver Burkeman, BURKEMAN.com.
And you are on Twitter?
I am, to my, yes, not particularly happily, but yes, I am on Twitter at Oliver Burkeman.
I started following you today. Oliver, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.